Rubiales messed up. What he did was wrong, but the persecution of him, which is still going on, is not the mark of a compassionate or a decent society. Those are the words of John McGuirk, editor of Gript Media, and he joins us now this morning. Good morning to you, John. Tell me why you've chosen to defend Luis Rubiales.
Well, if you read the piece, I haven't defended him. I've clearly said that what he did was wrong. I mean, you should not ever, in any circumstances, kiss a woman, or indeed any other person who has not indicated to you that they explicitly want to be kissed, verbally or non-verbally. What I've asked, though, is the question, does the punishment in this case fit the crime? We now have a criminal case where a man is in court facing criminal charges over, essentially a peck on the lips that lasted for half a second, and an incident that lasted an entire 4 seconds in a specific context, Ciara, which was a team had just won the World Cup. He's celebrating. He's clearly very exuberant. If you watch the clip, he puts his hand around the lady's head, and he pecks her on the lips. He shouldn't have done it. Absolutely wrong for him to have done it. The question is, what is the correct response in a society to that? I'm arguing in that piece that essentially Luis Rubiales is being made an example of, that he's not being punished, in fact, for his own crime, because his own crime is relatively minor. And that this is, in fact, I think, about setting a standard for essentially the potential crimes of other men and indeed the historic crimes of other men who haven't been prosecuted for much worse than what he did. And I've said in the piece, I think the headline is Feminist Vengeance. And I think there is a little bit of vengeance involved here. Because
is it vengeance, though, John, to draw a line in the sand? And I know what you're saying, and I accept that certainly what he did is not at the worst end of the scale of sexual assaults, not by a wide mile. Things can be much worse than that. But nonetheless, there is something minimising in what you're saying, just a peck on the lips. He grabbed her by the ears, he pulled her in, he kissed her on the lips in her workplace setting because she's a professional athlete and this was all to do with winning the World Cup. But also, and I get this very much so as a woman, it was humiliating for her. She didn't want to be kissed. And this man who was in a position of power, the head of Spanish football, he is there humiliating her and treating her like an object in a moment where she should be the proud captain of the team. It should be her pinnacle, her peak of her career. It should be a moment like that. And she says that he tarnished the happiest day of her life. It's more than a peck. It's the humiliation and it's the treating of her like he can do this, like he can take liberties with her. That's the thing. And whilst it's not the worst thing that could happen, and whilst you might say this is feminist revenge or vengeance or whatever, is it not reasonable for women at some point to draw a line in the sand because of all the things that you referred to that have gone before?
Yeah, but there are two things here, Ciara. First of all, when you're saying that this is about women drawing a line in the sand, it's essentially an admission that this guy has been made an example of, that it is pour encourager les autres. It is not necessarily for the crime he himself committed, but it is about drawing a line in the sand for other men. Now, that is not fair to the person involved in the particular case, because it suggests very much that it is a new precedent and that a line in the sand has not been drawn before on this issue, which it has.
Well, clearly not. A line in the sand hasn't been drawn enough because of what he did.
But look, what you're saying is essentially that we're drawing a line in the sand with this guy, using him as an example, which tends to confirm my piece. But the second point here is that, and I think this is the broader point without making it particularly argumentative between us, is that we have a situation here where I think we've lost is a basic degree of compassion in society for the fact that we are all human beings and we all do occasionally stupid things. What this guy did was inherently stupid, and the woman in question, Jenni Hermoso, is owed a grovelling apology, frankly.
Yeah,
but Ciara, like we have to live in a society where we have to be tolerant of the fact that everybody at the worst moment in their life messes up. And if this is the worst moment,
I actually have a tolerance for that, John. And I'm sure I'll mess up myself, and I have a tolerance for that, actually. Except for in this instance, if we were to take it from that point of view, you would expect him to apologise, to express remorse, not to double down, not to, I suppose, push back, not to try and coerce her into writing something saying it was consensual when clearly she didn't have a second even to consider consenting to it or not, because he just took it. He just took that moment from her. There was no option of consent. Luis Rubiales has hoisted himself on his own petard. He has acted fairly appallingly since as well.
I was reading some of the comments on the piece I wrote yesterday, because I did say in the piece he should have apologised. And several people actually said, you're wrong, John. He shouldn't have apologised. He was right not to apologise. Not because what he did was correct, not because he didn't owe her an apology, but because had he apologised the very next day and said, I was wrong, this was completely wrong, the situation actually would have been worse in that, you know, programs like yours, and I'm not targeting you, but programs in the media around the world would have said, he's admitted his guilt now, so now we'll just discuss what the punishment should be. Now, that was the perception of some of the people who are commenting on my piece.
And I understand that.
There's a point to it. And I think when these things become a public relations battle and become an issue of, like, essentially men versus women, a gender war situation.
And I accept all that, John, but you can't have it both ways. You can't have it both ways. If you're arguing that what we really want is a compassionate, forgiving, decent society, well then the onus is maybe on not a punitive approach being taken to him. Well then the onus is also on him to behave in a compassionate, decent way as well. You can't let him behave like a bit of a git and then us have to be, you know, the rest of us all have to be forgiving of him. Do you know what I mean? That's got to be a two-way street too, surely. You
know, I agree with that, and that's why there's a line in my article here, if you read it, which says a decent man would have apologised. No, I'm sure you did. A decent man would have apologised, and a decent woman would have accepted the apology, because it would have required two things. I think the fact that he didn't apologise implies that he's not a particularly decent man. So that's the first thing. But the question here is whether this amounts to a criminal case. I think that's the core case. Should somebody be brought up before a court on criminal charges of what amounts to a forced kiss? Now, I'm not saying there aren't circumstances where a forced kiss can't be criminal. Of course there are. But we've all seen this video. The guy is exuberant. He's in a moment of, you know, his team has just won the World Cup. By the way, I would also point that there are cultural factors. There are lots of people around the world who will have watched sporting events from Latin countries where it is quite often the case that people will grab other people, sometimes two men, sometimes two women, and kiss them in a moment of exuberance and imply that it is a criminal act of sexual assault. I think the punishment doesn't fit the crime, and I think
I actually accept a lot of what you're saying. He's on the stand. He's in court. Apparently, the punishment could be up to 2.5 years in prison. I think that would be disproportionate for what the man did. I absolutely do. But I'm not sure that there shouldn't be some sanction for him that extends beyond the workplace, because I do think that his behaviour is unacceptable. And I don't necessarily think that drawing a line in the sand isn't a reasonable thing to do at some point when this is such a public event.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to kind of bring into account the fact that there's a social sanction here already. This is the thing. I mean, this guy has already, in my view, deservedly been the subject of public humiliation and embarrassment for what he did. That is a punishment in and of itself. He's lost his job. I think that was probably appropriate. The fact that, you know, I don't think, you know, you can be the president of a football association and treating your staff like that. I think if you or I treated the people who work for us like that, you would probably also get the sack. I think that's an appropriate sanction. The question is, does it rise to the level of criminal? I don't think it does, and I think we're probably we sound to be in agreement on that. But yeah, it's a complicated case, and I think a lot of people have strong opinions on it.
It is, and actually it's a very well written and nuanced article, which is why we had you on to talk about it. But look, thank you for that indeed. That is John McGuirk, editor of Gript Media.